Good evening, and welcome back to Still Evening Voices. If you're listening tonight, I hope you've found a quiet moment for yourself. A place where the day has finally slowed down. And the world feels just a little softer. Here, we take our time, we remember, and sometimes, we listen to stories that stay with us long after the night is over. So settle in, get comfortable, and let me tell you a story. I have spent most of my life walking through the woods. More than 30 years, to be exact. Long enough to learn that the forest is not as quiet as people think. It has its own way of holding onto things. Not memories the way we understand them. Not photographs or written records. But something else. Something quieter. Something that lingers. And every now and then, if you spend enough time out there, it gives something back. My name is Daniel Harper, and I worked as a park ranger in northern Montana for most of my life. Back when I started, the job was simple. Walk the trails, check the boundaries, make sure no one got lost or hurt. It was quiet work, and I preferred it that way. No traffic, no crowds, just trees stretching farther than the eye could see, and the steady rhythm of your own footsteps. But there was one part of the forest we didn't talk about much. It wasn't marked on any of the visitor maps. Just a stretch of land north of an old fire road, deep enough that most hikers would never stumble across it by accident. The older rangers avoided it. Not because it was dangerous in any obvious way. There were no cliffs, no unstable ground, no reports of wildlife trouble. It just felt off. You know the kind of feeling. When you step into a place and something shifts. Almost too subtle to explain. Nothing you can point to. Nothing you can prove, but enough to make you pause. That was how that part of the forest felt. I didn't pay much attention to it at the time. I was younger then, still convinced that most things had a logical explanation. Sounds in the woods can be strange. Light can play tricks on your eyes. Old structures settle and creak. So when I was assigned a routine patrol in that direction, I didn't think twice. I set out early that morning. Just after sunrise. The air was cool. The kind that wakes you up without being uncomfortable. The trail was familiar at first. Tall pines on either side. Dry leaves underfoot. The quiet hum of the forest coming to life. But after about an hour, something changed. The sounds faded. At first, I didn't notice it right away. It happened gradually, like turning down the volume on a radio. The birds stopped calling. The insects went silent. Even the wind seemed to disappear. I remember stopping on the trail. Just standing there, listening. There was nothing. Not the peaceful kind of quiet. Not the kind you enjoy. The kind that feels like something is missing. I almost turned back. Almost. But I didn't. I kept walking. Another 20 minutes or so. And that's when I saw it. At first, it looked like just another shadow between the trees. But as I got closer, I realized it was a structure. A cabin. That wasn't unusual by itself. There were a few old cabins scattered throughout the forest. Remnants from decades ago. Most had been abandoned long before I started working there. But this one was different. The roof was intact. The walls were still standing straight. It didn't look new, but it didn't look like it had been left to fall apart either. And then I noticed something else. A thin line of smoke, barely visible, rising from a metal chimney. I stopped where I was. No one was supposed to be out there. I called out, just in case. "Hello?" My voice felt too loud in the stillness. There was no answer. I walked up to the porch. The wood creaked under my boots. But it held. The door was slightly open. Just enough to leave a narrow gap. I hesitated. Just for a moment. There was no reason to feel uneasy. This was part of the job. Check the structure. Make sure no one was trespassing. Still, something in me resisted. Then I pushed the door open. Inside, the air was warmer than I expected. The cabin was simple. A table, a chair, a small cast iron stove in the corner. No personal belongings. No clothes. No food. It didn't look like anyone lived there. But it didn't look abandoned either. On the table, there was a notebook. That was the first thing that stood out. Everything else had a thin layer of dust. But the notebook did not. I walked over slowly and placed my hand on the cover. For some reason, I paused again. It's hard to explain, but it felt like I was about to cross a line. Not physically, but in some other way. Still, I opened it. Most of the pages were empty. Old, yellowed paper, edges slightly curled with age. I flipped through them one by one. Blank, 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 until I reached the last page. There was writing there. Just one line. I remember it clearly. I have never forgotten it. It said, "Don't go north tomorrow." That was all. No name, no explanation. Just that sentence. I stared at it for a long moment, trying to make sense of it. It didn't. Then I noticed something else. The handwriting. At first, I couldn't place it. It just felt familiar in a way that made my chest tighten slightly. I leaned in closer. The shape of the letters. The way the lines curved. The spacing between the words. I had seen it before. Many times. Because it was mine. I actually let out a small laugh. Not because it was funny, but because it didn't make sense any other way. I told myself there had to be a simple explanation. Maybe I had been there before. Maybe I had written it and forgotten. It happens, more than people realize, especially when you spend years walking the same stretches of land. But something didn't sit right. I reached into my bag and pulled out my field log. Every ranger keeps one. Notes on routes, observations, anything out of the ordinary. I flipped through the pages. Day after day. Week after week. There was no record of this place. Not a single mention. I checked again. Slower this time. Still nothing. I stood there in that quiet cabin, holding that notebook, trying to convince myself it didn't mean anything. Eventually, I closed it and set it back on the table. I told myself I would report it later. But I didn't. I walked out of the cabin, back onto the trail, and headed toward my truck. By the time I reached the edge of the forest, I had almost convinced myself it was nothing more than a mistake. A memory I couldn't quite place. A coincidence that felt stranger than it really was. But that night, I couldn't sleep. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the house settling around me. And all I could think about was that line. Don't go north tomorrow. And the question that followed it. If I didn't write it, then who did? The next morning, I had a decision to make. I was scheduled for a routine patrol to the south. Nothing unusual, just another day. But instead, I changed direction. I went north. Back toward that part of the forest. Back toward that cabin. Back toward the place that wasn't on any map. And the warning? The one written in my own hand. I chose to ignore it. Looking back now, after all these years, I can tell you something I didn't understand then. Some messages are not meant to make sense when you first find them. And some warnings you only recognize as real after it's already too late. I didn't think of it as a mistake at the time. It felt more like curiosity. The kind that grows quietly in the back of your mind until it becomes the only thing you can think about. By the time I stepped back onto that trail, heading north again, I had already convinced myself there was nothing to worry about. People forget things. That was the explanation I held on to. I must have been there before. I must have written that message. Maybe I had seen something. Something small but important. And decided to leave myself a warning. It made sense. At least, it almost did. The walk felt different that morning. The same path, the same trees. But the air felt heavier. Even the sound of my boots against the ground seemed louder than it should have been. And just like the day before, the deeper I went, the quieter everything became. The birds were gone. The insects, too. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. I kept walking. I told myself to keep walking. Because turning back now would mean admitting that something about this didn't make sense. And I wasn't ready to do that. When the cabin finally came into view, I stopped. It looked exactly the same. The roof, the walls, the porch. But this time, there was no smoke. Not even the faintest trace. I approached slowly. Every step felt deliberate, like I was walking into something I didn't fully understand. The door was closed this time. I stood there for a moment, just looking at it. Then I reached out and pushed it open. Inside, the air was colder than the day before. The stove was dark. The room felt empty. Not abandoned. Empty. Like something had been there. And then left. I stepped inside and looked toward the table. The notebook was still there. Right where I had left it. I walked over. Slower this time. More careful. I opened it. Flipped through the pages. Blank. Every single one. I turned to the last page. The message was still there. Don't go north tomorrow. Same handwriting. Same ink. Same quiet warning. But something else had changed. There was another line beneath it. I don't know how I missed it the day before. Or maybe it hadn't been there. It said, "You won't listen. I felt something tighten in my chest. A kind of unease that doesn't come from fear, but from recognition. Like hearing your name spoken in a place where no one should know it. I closed the notebook. Slowly. Carefully. And for the first time, I considered leaving. Just walking away. Going back to my truck. Writing it off as something I didn't need to understand. But I didn't. Instead, I stepped back outside and looked north. Deeper into the forest. There was no trail there. Not a marked one. Just trees, uneven ground, and the kind of terrain most people would avoid. I stood there for a long time. Then I adjusted the strap on my bag and started walking. At first, nothing happened. Just the sound of my footsteps. The steady rhythm of breathing. Branches brushing against my jacket. But after a while, I began to notice something. Marks. Faint, but there. On the trees. Carved into the bark. Small symbols. Lines. Mostly. Some curved. Some straight. Not random. Placed with intention. I reached out and touched one. The wood was old, but the carving felt fresh. Too fresh. Like it had been done recently. I followed them. From one tree to the next. Each mark leading a little farther north. Each one pulling me deeper into a part of the forest I had never walked before. At least, not that I remembered. Time passed differently out there. I can't tell you how long I walked. An hour. Maybe more. The forest grew denser. The light dimmer. Until eventually, I came to a clearing. It wasn't large. Just enough space for something to stand in the middle. And there, half hidden by overgrowth, was an old ranger tower. I had never seen it before. Which didn't make sense. Structures like that are documented. Maintained, even if abandoned. They're recorded somewhere. But this one... looked forgotten. The stairs leading up were worn. But intact. The door at the base hung slightly open. I approached slowly. There was no sound. No movement. Just that same heavy stillness. I stepped inside. The air smelled old. Dust and wood and something faintly metallic. The inside was narrow. Just a ladder leading up to the watchroom. I hesitated at the base. Then I started climbing. Each step creaked beneath my weight. Louder than it should have been. The sound echoing in a way that made the space feel smaller than it was. When I reached the top, I pushed the door open. The room was small. Windows on all sides. A desk in the center. And on that desk, another notebook. This one was different. Older. Worn at the edges. I walked over and opened it. The pages were filled. Not blank like the one in the cabin. Covered in writing. My writing. Line after line. Dates. Notes. Observations. All in my handwriting. But I had never written any of it. I flipped through faster. My heart beating harder with each page. The entries became more frantic as I went. Shorter. Messier. like whoever wrote them was running out of time. Until I reached the last page. The writing there was uneven, shaking, like the hand that held the pen could barely keep still. It said, "You came here anyway." I felt the room shift around me. Not physically, but something inside me changed. Something settled into place. A realization I hadn't wanted to accept. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't something I had forgotten. This was something I hadn't done yet. A sound broke the silence. Soft. Somewhere below. A footstep. I froze. Listened. Another one. Slow. Deliberate. Coming from inside the tower. From below me. My first thought was that someone had followed me. Another ranger. A hiker. Anyone. But deep down, I already knew that wasn't true. The footsteps began to climb the ladder. One step at a time. Creaking. Echoing. Getting closer. I stepped back from the desk. My eyes fixed on the opening in the floor. Waiting. The sound stopped just below the top. Silence. Then, slowly, a hand appeared, gripping the edge. And then, a face. My face. Older. Tired. Eyes that had seen something I hadn't yet. We stared at each other. Neither of us spoke at first. Then he did. His voice was quiet. Calm. Like he had said these words before. "You shouldn't have come." I couldn't move. Couldn't think. All I could do was look at him. At myself. He pulled himself up into the room. Moved slowly, like every step cost him something. "I tried to warn you," he said. The note, the cabin, all of it. My mind struggled to catch up. This doesn't make sense," I said. He gave a small, tired smile. "It didn't to me either. Not the first time. The first time." The words settled in slowly. "What do you mean?" He looked toward the window. Out at the forest stretching endlessly in every direction. "It doesn't stop," he said. "You come here. You find the tower. You read the journal. And then." He paused. His eyes met mine again. "You stay." A cold weight settled in my chest. "No," I said quietly. "I can leave. I can walk out right now." He shook his head. "That's what I thought." Silence filled the room. Heavy. Unavoidable. "Then why are you here?" I asked. He looked down at his hands. At the faint marks on them. The kind that come from carving into wood. "I'm the one who made the marks," he said. "On the trees. I thought maybe I could guide you away. Change something." "And the note?" He nodded. "I wrote it in the cabin. Hoped you'd listen." I thought back to the message. The second line. "You won't listen." A slow realization began to form. "You added that later," I said. He didn't answer right away. Then he nodded. I had to be honest with myself. The room felt smaller now. The air heavier. "What happens if I leave?" I asked. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, "I don't know. That answer scared me more than anything else. Because it meant he had never tried. Or never succeeded. I took a step toward the ladder. He didn't stop me. Didn't reach out. He just watched. "You can go," he said. "But if you do." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. I stood there, caught between two choices. Leave. Or stay. One unknown. One certain. I don't remember making the decision. Not clearly. I just remember taking a step. Then another. And then I was back in the forest. Walking. The tower behind me. The silence still there, but different now. Less empty. More aware. I don't know how long it took me to find my way back. Hours. Maybe longer. But eventually, I reached the edge of the trees. My truck was still there. Just as I had left it. I drove home that night in silence. Didn't turn on the radio. Didn't speak. Just drove. And when I got back, I did something I hadn't planned. I opened my field log. Turned to a blank page. And I started writing. Everything I could remember. The cabin. The message. The tower. Him. Me. Because I understood something now. Something I hadn't before. If I didn't write it down, I might forget. And if I forgot, I might walk that path again. Years have passed since that day. I retired not long after. Never went back to that part of the forest. Not once. But sometimes, late at night, I still think about it. About the man I saw. About the life he lived. Or the one I almost did. And I wonder, did I break the loop? Or did I just step out of it? For now, if there's one thing I've learned after all these years, it's this. Not every path is meant to be followed. And not every warning is meant to be ignored. Some are given to you for a reason. Even if you don't understand it at the time. So if you ever find yourself standing at a crossroads, and something inside you tells you to turn back, you might want to listen. Because sometimes, the voice you're hearing is your own. Thank you for spending this quiet time with me. If this story stayed with you, if it made you think, or remember something of your own, I'd be honored if you stayed a little longer. You can subscribe to Still Evening Voices for more stories like this. Told slowly, the way they're meant to be heard. Until next time, take care of yourself. And have a peaceful evening.